Welcome, Blueshirts faithful, to the latest edition of the Rink podcast. I am Jim Cerny. Thanks for coming to hang out today. Memorial Day weekend is here. Summer. It's 45 freaking degrees out there right now. You know, I've got the flannel on. It's ridiculous. I got the heat turned up in the house. 45. Oh, no. I'm looking at my other computer here. It's 49 degrees now outside. Are you freaking kidding me? I know not all of our watchers, viewers, listeners to the podcast are in the tri-state New York area. So maybe wherever you are, somewhere out there, you know, it's 85 and sunny, or, you know, something almost summer-like. Not here in New York. Come on. Going to go out there with my parka and my gloves on, you know, to hit up the grill this weekend for Memorial Day weekend. My goodness. In any case, summer supposedly is around the corner. We're in the conference finals now. We've had a game in the Eastern Conference Final, a game in the Western Conference Final. You know, we'll touch on a little bit of that. I did a column earlier this week about, you know, could the Eastern Conference Final be any worse if you're a Ranger fan, right? You know, you hate the Carolina Hurricanes. They're one of your arch rivals now, really built up that rivalry the last few years. And you're sick of them making the playoffs every year, always winning at least a round. You know, now, like you, they've been in the conference final a couple times out of the past few years. You know, you're sick of them, right? You're a Ranger fan. You hate the Carolina Hurricanes. Let's face it. But there they are. And of course, then there are the Florida Panthers, right? You know, the team that you want to be so badly, but you hate them. They're dirty. They're nasty. They kicked the Rangers' butts left, right, and center in the conference final last year. You hate the Panthers. They won the Stanley Cup. You hate them even more. Now they're back in their third straight year in the conference final. So listen, Ranger fans, we feel your pain here at the Rink podcast. And probably if you're a Rangers fan, you're probably also a New York Knicks fan. So God bless you. Man, misery loves company, right? And right now the Garden is full of misery. You know, you think the Knicks are finally on their way, right? You know, they won a championship in 1973. So 52 years, almost the Rangers' 54 years from 1940 to 1990 to 1940 to 1994. Yeah, but now it's the Knicks' turn, right? They beat the defending champion Celtics, and then they, you know, along the way, you know, those two amazing comebacks against the Celtics, you know, and on the road, and it's all going your way, right? You dispatch them. You're finally back in the conference final. You know, you're hosting. You have home court advantage at the Garden, and you have the worst possible outcome in game one. So bad, you do something that's never happened before in the history of the NBA playoffs. Up 14, under 3 minutes to play, you blow it and lose it overtime, 138-135. Well, 994, or I think that was the number, right? 994 times a team's been up by at least 14 points in an NBA playoff game with 2 minutes, 45 seconds to go. 994 times, and they won each time until last night. Oh, my goodness. So, yeah. So if you're a Knicks fan that crosses over and you just love everybody at the Garden, and you're a Knicks fan as well, you know, you're a Rangers fan that's a Knicks fan. Listen, man, it's a lot of pain because the Rangers aren't even in the playoffs. Didn't even make the playoffs. Crappy regular season. One that gave you agita pretty much from the beginning of November all the way until the end. And now you got the Hurricanes and the Panthers in the Eastern Conference Final in the NHL, and one of them's going to the Stanley Cup. And yeah, I know it's not easy being a Ranger fan, right? But listen, we're going to discuss a few topics here today, you know, and then next week we're going to come back with a good guest, get somebody else's opinion. But yeah, there are just too many things I just wanted to riff on this week. So that's what we're going to do. Real quickly, a little bit of news on this Thursday for the New York Rangers, and that's behind their bench. we know Mike Sullivan's already, the head coach replacing Peter Laviolette. Well, Michael Peca has moved on. He was not fired when Peter Laviolette and Phil Housley were let go at the end of the season. As an assistant coach, Peca was still under contract, and the Rangers didn't fire him, nor Dan Muse. However, Peca is leaving the organization, and he is going to join the Chicago Blackhawks, who today named Jeff Blashill as their new head coach. So Peca will move over. That will be his second assistant coaching job in the NHL. So good luck to him. A guy that, if he's remembered for one thing here, right? I know he's in charge of the power play, had his hand in the penalty kill. Power play was really good the first year, not so good the second year. But the faceoffs, the Rangers always sucked at faceoffs. Like forever, they have sucked. Decades, they have sucked at faceoffs. And they were really good in faceoffs under Michael Peca's tutelage. And of course, in his day, he was an outstanding faceoff guy in the NHL. But did a good job. Listen, he had some things to work with here. Vincent Trocheck is historically good on faceoffs anyway, and he's been among the league's best these last couple of years. But the Rangers were 53% this year on faceoffs. One of the better teams in the NHL in faceoffs. So these 2 years under Michael Peca. So to me, that's one of the things that stands out. Some people just wanted to completely clear house with the assistant coaches. I get it after such a terrible season. I get that mindset. So Peca is out. Housley is out. Laviolette is out. Dan Muse might still be in the mix. We'll see. Here's my theory on putting together a coaching staff, just real quickly. I am all for a coach, whether he be a veteran like Mike Sullivan or whether he be a first-timer. You can pick any first-timer in the league. That they get to have somebody that they're familiar with on their staff. I think that's good. Somebody that they trust, have a history with, kind of speak the same language, if you will. Makes it an easier transition from, coach to player. That bridge in between is that assistant coach who knows the head coach really well and has a history with him and is able to continue to deliver the message in the same language as the head coach. They're on the same page. They're simpatico. And Mike Sullivan was that in his first go round here on Broadway when he was the assistant under John Tortorella, when Tortorella brought him over, from Tampa. So I'm all for that. And if that's, what Sullivan ends up doing, and he ends up having, one of his trusted lieutenants join him in New York, great, all for it. But I think it's equally as important to have new voices there as well. New voices for the players, but new voices for the head coach too. Obviously somebody he trusts, and, you go through an interview process. You make sure that you have a relationship, that you're compatible, looks like you're going to be able to work together. Somebody that fills in kind of the yin and yang. Oh, well, I've got Coach X that's going to run the power play. I need somebody for defense and penalty kill. I get that. They've got to fit in as well. But I like having the new voice or two for a head coach. And, for somebody like Mike Sullivan, listen, he's gone through a lot of different assistants, in his 10 years with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So I think that's a good balance. I don't think it should be all Sully acolytes coming in, to work with him behind the bench. And I don't think it should be all new guys. If it is, that's how it works out. Okay. But I don't think that should be a plan or a strategy. So in any case, we'll see. Rangers have not announced their coaching staff beyond the head coach. Jeff Malcolm has remained as the goalie coach. We do know that. So that should probably come, and, who knows, in the coming weeks. Maybe the Rangers, Sully still has some interest in, somebody who's still behind a bench with one of the four teams remaining in the Stanley Cup playoffs. We'll know when we know. I'm not too worked up about, who's going to be the assistant coaches just yet. But that's the mix that I like. I really like to see him get somebody, as I called it, an acolyte. An acolyte is Sullivan, somebody he has a history with, and then bring in another coach or two that's new. And I think it's fresh ideas, fresh voice for both the coach and for the players. So, okay, let's move on. Big topic this last week plus for us over at Forever Blueshirts has been Chris Kreider. And man, are people worked up about Chris Kreider. But I think that's great. I love the fans' passion about it. And originally, when I wrote the story saying that the Rangers really need to move on from Chris Kreider, and I listed the reasons why. Listen, and the very first thing, or one of the first things I wrote was, we can't be sentimental about this. I know he's a lifelong Ranger. I know he's one of the all-time great goal scorers in franchise history, one of the better playoff performers in franchise history. But I've listed the reasons why I thought the Rangers needed to move on from Chris Kreider this offseason, even acknowledging, or while acknowledging, that Kreider could very well bounce back and be a 30-goal scorer next season. Could be a dynamo on the power play and penalty kill again next season. But I think it's time. I think it's time that they move on from Chris Kreider. And part of the reason for that is their salary cap situation. So really, it's two topics here, right? It's where Kreider's at, 34 years old, where he's headed, his contract at $6.5 million a year, clearly not a happy camper by, Chris Drury throwing his name in that trade memo this year, dealing with all the injuries. It just feels like it's time. Like it would be good for Chris Kreider, but good for the organization as well. And that's even if he bounces back to be a 30-goal scorer. Now, of course, you look at me and you say, oh, you're out of your mind. What are you thinking? And I've got a ton of that over here on my Twitter, my X, timeline. A lot of defenders of Chris Kreider. Jim, you're out of your mind. What you just cast aside, throw out, this guy who's this great New York Ranger. We're going to raise 20 to the rafters. He should be a career-long New York Ranger. I get the argument. I get the love. I get the sentimental feeling about Chris Kreider because he's been a real good New York Ranger. Took him a little while to develop, to find his way, find consistency. It's crazy that his best years have been, on the other side of 30. Which certainly makes you hopeful that he's due for a bounce back if he's healthy again next year, at 34, 35 years old. So I get those arguments. And I even wrote a second column, almost defending myself, fans thinking that I was taking this out personally on Chris Kreider, not appreciating what a great Ranger he's been or whatever. He's been a really good New York Ranger. But there's nothing personal here in what I say about Chris. I know him. I was the first guy to interview him working for the team when he was drafted in Montreal back in 2009. And from that point forward, we built up a great relationship. I wrote this in the column. I know his mom and dad. I met them and spent time with them. I went back to Boston College, with Kreider. A couple of years after he left school, we went back and we toured the campus. He's like, oh, here's where I lived as a freshman, and here was my locker, in the locker room, and here, this, that, the other thing. We sat together, often on the team charters when I worked for the team. And I don't say that to, Jim's cool. He worked for the team. It's not that. I'm just letting you know that I have this relationship with Chris Kreider, and I think he's a super dude. He's a great guy. He's intelligent. He cares. He's passionate. He's just a good person, right? On top of being a really good hockey player, he's a good person. I don't mean I have no ill will. I have no disrespect for him. I totally respect what he's done for this organization. But at the end of the day, the Rangers enter the offseason with under $9 million of salary cap space. You heard so much about the cap going up this year, and it did, $95.5 million for next season, beginning July 1. Well, the Rangers have eaten away at a lot of that with the massive extension to Igor Shesterkin, the big extension for Alexis Lafreniere, the extension to Will Borgen, and then to a lesser degree, the extensions for Urho Vakanainen and Juuso Parssinen. I mean, They don't chew up a lot of money, but they did chew into it, those last 2 contracts. So they have under $9 million available. Okay. So you got Keandre Miller, assuming, and I'm assuming that the Rangers want to bring him back and re-sign him. They're not going to move him. And Will Cooley. That could be, arguably, there is a world where you chew up almost all of your salary cap space just in bringing back those 2 restricted free agents. Okay. Maybe not. Jury's done a good job, I think, with a lot of these contracts, coming in less than what we expect. We'll see what kind of magic he can work here with those 2. You also have Matt Rempe and Adam Edstrom. You got to get those guys signed. Pair of restricted free agents. Or, I don't think Zach Jones is coming back, but, if he does, you got to pay him. Arthur Kaliev, it's hit or miss whether or not he's going to come back. If he does, it's not going to be a lot of money. But again, it all adds up. So you got to clear some space, unless you're cool with totally running it back, right? Running it back with the team that failed to make the playoffs this year, going under the assumption that this team's going to play better under the new head coach. They're going to be a year removed, a whole summer, a whole off season removed from all the crap that went on last year with Trouba and Goudreau and how Chris Drury handled it and the trade memo and all that stuff. You figure, okay, that's in the past. The air is cleared. It's a new season. Guys are going to be motivated. They were embarrassed by what happened this season. Mike Sullivan, there's always an uptick, right? There's good players here on this roster. So there's going to be an uptick on the season, and that should get the Rangers back into the Stanley Cup playoffs. But is that enough? And has enough change been made? Like, if they get back into the Stanley Cup playoffs, are they really a Stanley Cup contender? And I know the argument, when you got Igor Shesterkin, a goalie like Igor Shesterkin, you can steal games, you can steal series in the postseason, and then, hey, you get to the conference final, and who knows? Well, we've played that game the last few years, right? Rangers have made it to the conference final twice. Exciting runs, for sure, both times. But both times, they learned that they weren't good enough. They weren't tough enough. They weren't built quite to win the Stanley Cup yet. Now, JT Miller's been added, kind of changed that dynamic, changed the dynamic of the core a little bit, both in the locker room and certainly on the ice. Will Borgen has replaced the Jacob Trouba, toughness angle, if you will. But have they done enough? Like, do you watch these games? Watch these teams? Do you watch the Florida Panthers and just see how relentless they are? How committed to winning they are? Carolina Hurricanes, too. They are as well. But they're just, even they don't seem built like the Florida Panthers. How about the Edmonton Oilers? Dallas Stars. Now, Dallas, the depth, the commitment, the buy-in, that physicality. It's a different mindset the deeper you get into the postseason. So if you run it back, do you feel confident that this group of New York Rangers is good enough to be a true Stanley Cup contender? Maybe you do. Maybe that's why you say they should run it back. But they don't have a lot of wiggle room if nobody comes off this roster. They don't have a lot of wiggle room to add, to maybe bring in some grit. Maybe find somewhere out there their own Sam Bennett. Like, I think Sam Bennett is going to make a boatload of money somewhere from someone this offseason. And I know, listen, I'd love to have Sam Bennett on the Rangers. I don't see how any way, shape, or form that you afford him, because somebody's going to way overpay for him for what he brings. And he's also a guy, he's 28 now. There's a good chance that motor and the way he plays all the time and the tenacious way that he plays in the postseason, not the biggest guy. There might be a breakdown down the road with him physically. So I don't know how well his contract's going to age. But what I would love is to find the next Sam Bennett. Somebody who's 23, 24, 25 now. Less mileage on him. But that has that motor. That maybe just hasn't had the chance on the big stage yet. Kind of like, oh yeah, when the Panthers acquired Bennett from the Calgary Flames a few years ago, when he was the 25-year-old guy, had shown glimpses of what he could be in the postseason with Calgary, because he did play well for Calgary in the postseason. But did we know at the time that he'd be what he is now? The heart and soul, really. And I know Matthew Tkachuk is there, and I know, Sasha Barkov is there. I know what the Panthers have. But really, Sam Bennett's like the heart and soul of that team. Well, do the Rangers have that? You think JT Miller's that guy? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. But I think you got to find that next Sam Bennett, right? So anyway, I'm going off on a tangent here. Bottom line is, you got to free up some money if you want to make some moves. If you do not believe that the New York Rangers are a Stanley Cup contender. Now, I wrote about it in another column this week. I've done a lot of time on the cap and on the Kreider situation. Say, okay, if you keep Chris Kreider, who is probably an easier guy to trade right now, when you consider no move clauses, no trade clauses, kind of what he went through last year. You could argue that this is just the beginning of the decline with all the injuries because of his age, because of the type game that he plays, the pounding he takes in front of the opposition's net. Man, I was there when Adam Graves started to age near the end with the New York Rangers before he got shipped off to San Jose. And it wasn't pretty. And he's not the only guy. It's all these like power forwards that spend so much time camped out, in the dirty areas, just taking a beating, sacrificing their body for the deflections and the rebounds and, going hard to the net and winning puck battles. And it's tough business. And a lot of times when these guys get into their 30s, and, listen, Kreider is 34 now. When it starts to go south, it continues to go south. Listen, he's a physical specimen, Chris Kreider. I know that firsthand. I've seen this guy train. I've seen this guy work out. He's legit. He's put together. But everybody's human. And he had a lot of different injuries last year. And some of them weird, fluky stuff too. The hand injury, the vertigo that he had that he dealt with. That's fluky stuff. The back worries me with a big, strong guy, power forward that plays in front of the net. And again, I use Graves as the example because he was a former Ranger and I was there. When it goes south, it goes south. Doesn't mean Kreider won't score 30 goals next year. But I think he's the piece that you can move to open up some salary cap space to just change the mix here. And I'm going to make this next comment with prefacing it by saying there's no disrespect to the player. Everything I said before about Chris holds true, about how I feel about him as a person and as a player. He's never won. We're not putting a 3-time Stanley Cup champion here up. Now, I know standards are different here with the New York Rangers because they've won one damn Stanley Cup championship in 84 years, 85 years, right? So maybe we look at our favored players and successful players in franchise history in a different light because, hey, nobody's winning a Stanley Cup except that 1994 team, right? In my lifetime, in your lifetime, in our parents' lifetimes, generations of Ranger fans, families of Ranger fans have seen one Stanley Cup championship. It's insane. So maybe our standards change. But at the end of the day, Chris, unfortunately, has played in one Stanley Cup final, has never won a Stanley Cup championship. So by trading him, we're not trading Mark Messier and 6 rings, okay? I know it sounds crass or disrespectful, but it's a bottom line truth. So if you think that by opening up some salary cap space by trading him, that you can bring in elements that might help you better get to winning a Stanley Cup, I think you do it. I just feel weird about running this back with the same group, knowing again that their biggest move was made on January 31st, and that was the acquisition of JT Miller. I get that. Like their big quote unquote offseason or trade deadline acquisition came back on January 31st, and he's in place. I think he's going to be in a better place physically, mentally, everything when training camp opens next year. Listen, he went through a tough time in Vancouver before he even arrived here in New York this season. Not to mention, the physical toll that he took in the Four Nations tournament in the middle of the season as well, which I think helped wear him down. So I think he'll be in a good spot, maybe to be that difference maker for the Rangers next year. I'm not sure it's enough though. Okay. So, and I look over here at my other computer and, the notifications I get and responses from people, on X saying, just get rid of Panarin. You got to keep Kreider. Get rid of Panarin. Get rid of Mika and all that. It's not that simple. I'm not saying don't explore what it would take to move Mika Zibanejad as an example, or Artemi Panarin in his last year. Bunch goes into it though. It's not going to be easy, and you would think Chris Drury's doing his homework, right behind the scenes. Unless Mike Sullivan told him, "Listen, man, I got to have Artemi Panarin, or I got to have Mika Zibanejad," whatever the case might be. You'd assume that Drury is doing his homework to find out, what can I do here? How can I, or can I even think about working around the no move clause in each of those contracts? Because that's what they have. Kreider's got a 15-team no trade. Mika and Panarin have no move clauses. And people, again, it drives me nuts a little bit, but the messages that I get, just move him, get rid of him, bury his money in the minor leagues, send him to Hartford. Oh, that does the Rangers a lot of good. Take the leading scorer, whether you like him or not, take the leading scorer. Let's bury his $11.5 million in Hartford. Come on, man. Then that'll get him. He'll say, "Oh, okay, trade me anywhere then." That'll solve the problem. No, it's not going to solve the problem. It's not going to be easy to move on from Panarin or Zibanejad. May not be impossible, but man, would it take a lot of work and a lot of partnership from the player as well and the player's agent to help you work something out here. Kreider is the easier move. Now, there are other options too. You can free up $3.25 million by trading Carson Susie. Okay, that gives you a little bit more wiggle room. You could, here's another nuclear bomb. You could trade Alexis Lafreniere coming off a down season, see what you could get for him. Clear his $7+ million. But of course, if you do that, you're not just going for draft picks and all that. You're going to try and get a younger player back. As we were writing about this week, Bowen Byram, with the Buffalo Sabres, if they're going to move him. You got to get somebody back. If you're trading Lafreniere, you're talking about a 24-year-old guy, next season. Those are the guys you probably want to keep and build around. So there aren't a lot of options here. You could walk away from K'Andre Miller and trade him. He's a RFA, arbitration rights. This is one of those do it or get off the pot moments, right? With K'Andre Miller. You got to decide on him. Are you going to invest? You're going to give him a 5-6 year contract here? At big money, a big raise? Do you believe in him? Has he shown you enough consistency to believe in him? Or are you going to totally roll the dice and trade him away? And then you're not paying him, but you got to replace him on the roster then. Every move has a consequence. And I get trading Chris Kreider, there's consequence to it because you're taking a risk. You're losing one of your best penalty killers. You're losing a guy that, okay, it wasn't great for him on the power play this year, but he's been a power play staple, for years. 30-goal guy. Even this year, he had 22 goals. I get it. It was a third on the team in goal scoring this year. What was a down year for him. I know he only had the 30 points. There were no assists, no apples for Kreider. These are all things I understand. But so every move that you make or don't make has a consequence. So if you're in the camp of can't trade Chris Kreider, then what do? I'm telling you, it's not going to be easy to trade Zibanejad or Panarin. Near impossible, to be honest, but not impossible, but near impossible. And if you trade K'Andre Miller, you got to replace him in the lineup. Okay, trade Carson Susie. Even him, you have to replace, right? Because right now he's probably in your top 6 on the left side. So even he you have to replace so that $3+ million gets chewed up pretty quickly. It's a tough spot the Rangers are in right now this offseason. So the biggest thing that they can do to shake up the core and, on the other hand, to free up some money to continue to change the core a little bit would be to trade Chris Kreider. You can agree or disagree that it's the right thing to do, but I just don't see where the other alternatives work out or can work out. In any case, we'll find out and we'll debate it throughout the offseason until things happen, right? Until we get to July 1 and beyond July 1. The other thing, RFA offer sheets. I thought Larry Brooks wrote a really good column on it in the Post the other day. And it's something that I've been tying into my stories as well. Rangers are tight against that cap. And who's to say somebody didn't come after Will Cooley or somebody, as Brooks pointed out, maybe the more likely target is Matt Rempe. Because right now you're like, oh, that should be simple. Put him in for 1.2, 1.3 for the next year or two. That'll be easy. Yeah, well, it's easy unless somebody really wants Matt Rempe out there. And they say, let's give him $2.5 million a year. Uh-oh. Then if you're the Rangers, you're in trouble, right? Uh-oh. We're going to lose this guy. Are we going to match that? Okay, if we do match it, what are the ripple effects past that? These are just all things you got to consider. And I'm not saying that there are so many teams out there hungry to get Matt Rempe, but I think he intrigues a lot of teams out there. I think Larry was onto something with that comment. Certainly teams are going to be intrigued by Will Cooley, but I don't see the Rangers, letting him go. Or saying, wow, somebody offered him $4.5 million a year, or $4.4 million a year. We're not going to match that. Well, the Rangers would find a way, but that put a crimp in things. Making Will Cooley right now a priority and getting him signed, hopefully to a bridge deal, a couple years, and then when the cap really goes up, over the next couple seasons. And Artemi Panarin's 11 plus million comes off the books. And, then if Will Cooley continues to progress as he is, okay, then he lands his big contract. But you got to get him right now to buy in. You got to get his agent to buy in on a bridge deal right now, an affordable bridge deal. So these are other things that the Rangers have to deal with, as the offseason comes to pass. The Rangers, I don't see a massive shakeup this offseason. There are people, out there that contact me and say, gotta blow it up. Keep JT Miller, keep Adam Fox, keep Igor Shesterkin, and blow the rest of it up. Keep Will Cooley, blow the rest of it up. It's just not going to happen, okay? I don't know that there's going to be a massive overhaul with the Rangers this offseason. I don't see it. But to make changes to the core, I think it's got to start with the trade of Chris Kreider. Again, at Jim Cerny, I'm here all the time. Send me some messages. I'll reply to you. I'll take in everything that you say. I don't disrespect anybody's opinion. I just try and look at this logically, which is what Chris Drury's got to do. You got to be really logical, a little cold-blooded, cold-hearted if you're a general manager. He certainly is proven to be cold-blooded, over the past year. But, he's probably the right guy for the job right now because I don't think he's afraid of moving on or, moving on from a franchise. I don't know that Kreider is an icon, but certainly a popular, long-term, longest tenured, New York Rangers player. So we'll see. We'll continue to monitor it. Again, we're going to come back next week. We're going to talk about whatever's happened in the prior week with the Rangers. We're going to have a special guest as well. Well, I think this Kreider thing is going to be an evolving conversation between me and you over social media and with stories and all that, because I know it's touched a nerve. I know it's really fired up a lot of people. Very, very passionate about this, which I love. It's great. I love the debate, and we'll continue it right here on the Rink Rat Podcast. Follow me at Jim Cerny. Follow us at Forever Blueshirts, also on Twitter, and follow us on Facebook as well. We're going to have some cool social media things going on. I brought somebody on to handle that. Ryan's going to be our guy, pulling together some good social media stuff moving forward. So look for that as the offseason progresses. And of course, please follow us and all the stories that we write as we preview the draft, guys that might be available for the Rangers at number 12, who's a fit, who's not, who makes sense, who doesn't. We're doing a lot of those stories as well. Look ahead to free agency. We had the Adam Gaudette story the other day, how he might or might not be a fit for the New York Rangers as they try and figure out the identity of their third line this offseason. I mean, there's so much to break down for this team. We do it every day at the Forever Blue Shirts website, foreverblueshirts.com. So make sure to join us there as well. So, hey, listen, enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. Squeeze in a little bit of hockey. Hopefully we get into the 50s, maybe even 60s before the weekend is over. And at some point soon, I hear there's a nor'easter coming. Oh my gosh. Hopefully after the nor'easter, we start to tick back up, back into the 70s and 80s. I am so ready for the summer, and I'm so into this off season as well and sharing it with you right here on Rink Rat Podcast. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Cheers.